Heavy clashes are underway between the Taliban and a major resistance movement just north of Kabul. The group of anti-Taliban fighters have vowed to protect their stronghold and intensify their efforts across the mountainous region. This is the last significant area of Afghanistan that hasn't been seized by the Taliban. So for more on this, we want to bring in Charlie D'Agata. He's following the latest from Doha, Qatar. Charlie, thanks for joining us. So the U.S. is out of Afghanistan. The Afghan government does not exist anymore, so I'm presuming there is no formal Afghan military. Who are these resistance fighters? What do they want? And is the U.S. providing any support to this group?
Well, Anne-Marie, the core of the group is led by Ahmad Massoud, who is the son of Shah Ahmad Massoud, or Ahmad Shah Massoud, who was in charge of the Northern Alliance, who were fighting the Taliban in the beginning, before 2001, and who the United States allied with. We're not exactly sure how many people are inside. What we're talking is the Panjshir Valley. It is a heavily defended area. It has a natural defense around it. And from what we understand, a number of Afghan forces who did not want to surrender to the Taliban decided to move to the Panjshir Valley. The Taliban have said officially they're trying to negotiate their way out of this. They've talked to Massoud himself saying, look, we don't really want to fight. You are surrounded. You don't have the kind of resources to mount a serious resistance. But according to the Taliban anyway, Massoud is asking for some sort of representation within the government, which they have just flatly denied. So yes, there's heavy fighting that's taking place. In terms of whether there is outside U.S. or international support, they've certainly requested to have that support. Officially, as far as we're aware, none of that's happened.
Yeah, I suppose things could get complicated because, after all, the U.S. is still dependent on cooperation with the Taliban to get American citizens out if they want to leave, Afghan allies out if they want to leave. Charlie, the Pentagon says that it's, quote, possible that the U.S. could work with the Taliban to fight ISIS across Afghanistan. Now, we know American troops and diplomats have already been in communication with the Taliban for quite some time, but now, could this relationship shift a little now that Taliban fighters are actually in charge of the country?
Yeah, well, this is it. I think it depends on what degree or level of cooperation we're talking about here now, because I have to make plain that even as the United States was aligned with Afghan forces in the fight against ISIS, there was a level of cooperation with the Taliban, which is to say the Taliban knew exactly where these ISIS holdouts were, where their hideouts were, largely concentrated in Nangarhar Valley and Nangarhar province, close to the Pakistani border. So they were already sharing intelligence on that level, which is strange when you consider the Taliban at that time, well, possibly even now, is the enemy of the United States and certainly of the Afghan government, but they had a common enemy in ISIS. So do the Taliban have a lock on ISIS? Absolutely. Where this becomes mutually beneficial is the Taliban are now, whether we like it or not, the eyes and ears on the ground for the U.S. military and international and coalition forces if they want to continue to pursue ISIS-K or ISIS in Afghanistan. So they're going to be reliant on Taliban intelligence. At the same time, the Taliban is going to be reliant on U.S. air power. So, you know, going forward, I could see where there's going to be cooperation because it doesn't serve, most importantly, the people of Afghanistan to let ISIS take hold. So you will see levels of cooperation that are already happening on a diplomatic level. Militarily, if it is happening, it's not something that anybody really wants to broadcast, but they may be ascertaining these targets, these high-level targets in Nangarhar, in dealing with the Taliban and U.S. forces who have got the firepower to deliver.
And the Taliban is also going to need something else if they want to establish a functioning government. They're going to need a lot of money, probably aid from other countries. I thought we were going to see some sort of unveiling of what their government was going to look like. I thought that was going to happen actually yesterday, to tell you the truth, but I don't think it did. What are you hearing about the efforts and the interest of other countries in helping the Taliban establish a government?
Yeah, Anne-Marie, you and me both. We were expecting it either yesterday or perhaps today after Friday prayers. Now it's been pushed back, Taliban officials tell us, in the next few days. And I think it probably talks about the friction within the Taliban itself. You've got the Taliban from Kandahar, who wanted the biggest piece of the pie. You've got the Taliban from the north and eastern regions who want to make sure that they're represented. And that's where some of this jockeying is taking place. Insofar as who's going to recognize this Taliban government most immediately, we can fathom a guess that it's going to be countries like China and Russia. China has not stopped its diplomatic ties in Afghanistan, one of very few to keep its diplomatic presence within Afghanistan. By and large, most of the diplomatic missions, including the United States, United Kingdom, have now come here to Doha to reestablish their diplomatic missions here. But there are certain levels of diplomacy, too, that we have to discuss. The EU just said yesterday we're not really comfortable in officially recognizing the Taliban, but we're willing to work with the Taliban in the days and weeks ahead, primarily when it comes to humanitarian aid. And I can report that humanitarian aid flights have begun again, not in Kabul. That airport is not working for all intents and purposes. A couple of flights have come in and out of Doha. Doha technical engineers have made that flight. But in other places like Kandahar and Mazar Sharif, the World Food Program and others are trying to get aid in there as quickly as possible. Of course, the Europeans are aware of that. The United States is aware of that. So on one level, there will be cooperation without necessarily having to officially recognize the Taliban as a working government.
Yeah, it's pretty complicated, isn't it? Like the Taliban has said that it's sort of a new Taliban and has promised all sorts of things, including that, that women will be able to continue working. But the only leverage, really, that countries like the U.S. and other countries have, if they're interested in these sort of human rights issues, is with aid. They can withhold aid or not withhold aid, but then that also means that they have to kind of recognize the Taliban as a legitimate government.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Taliban have got to make good on their promises, the so-called Taliban 2.0, and they continue to get these messages out. Their PR and marketing is on overdrive, saying, look, we understand the mistakes that we made in the past. We're not dealing with the same Afghanistan that we were 20 years ago. You got largely educated, young, new generation, women who already hold positions of power and important positions, not only within the government, but within the community. So they're going to have to make sure that they protect that, or at least give the impression of protecting that. But you mentioned aid. It's not just aid. The United States is currently frozen $9.6 billion in Afghan assets. On a daily basis, they would ship cash to the Afghan government to keep it up and running. That's all been frozen. So, Afghanistan is quickly running out of money. And yes, it might be argued that the people that are going to suffer the most are the Afghans themselves and the poorest among them. But in order to release the frozen assets and aid and the daily supply of cash that you and I, American taxpayers and others, have been paying in order to prop up the Afghan government, the Afghan military, they're going to have to play ball, or at least give the appearance of playing ball. So I think that's what we may see over the next weeks and months. But however, Taliban have already said in these important positions in the government, the cabinet positions, if you will, or the ministerial roles, women are not going to hold those positions. They may hold other positions, but not those positions.
Interesting. Charlie D'Agata, thank you very much.